in Indianapolis, Indiana. So we have about 45 minutes, and during our time together, I will discuss distinct features of the community college landscape, the importance of the two-year sector in broadening participation, and particularly with regard to STEM pathways and completion, as well as highlight a study on transfer STEM students and share some implications for practice, followed by which we will have a few minutes for questions and comments. Before we really get into the thick of it, I wanted to share a little bit about OCCRL. OCCRL is the Office for Community College Research and Leadership. And as you can see from the slide, our researchers study policies, programs, and practices, and we look at things across the spectrum in terms of P20, but in particular, we pay attention to what's going on for learners as they move in, through, and out of community colleges. And so our studies are disseminated nationally and internationally. We have reports and materials that we feel capture knowledge, add to the knowledge base, and we disseminate through our website and various scholarly publications and other vehicles. Having said that, I want to share with you some additional information as we move into, again, the nitty-gritty of why we're here this afternoon. I want you to kind of consider what you feel community colleges mean to you. When you hear the term community colleges, what readily comes to mind? So what readily comes to mind for you is a place of opportunity. That's wonderful. But more often than not, community colleges have been privy to what I would call stigma throughout America. There's many influences on what mainstream society thinks about community colleges, and it's only in recent years that the status of attending a community college has not been judged as disfavorably as it has in times past. So when we look at the origins of the colleges, we have to think about, at its roots, community colleges came about as a means of creating opportunity and broadening access. But the perception versus the reality when we think about community college is one where we're still at a point of having to shift these persistent perceptions that perpetuate a deficit lens for community colleges. There are many institutions when we think about community colleges that have an open door, but open door doesn't necessarily mean open access. And so because of the historical uneven access to social and cultural repositories of capital, we really needed the community colleges, and they have in part really created more of a massification of higher education opportunities. Given an open access mission, community colleges are serving students from diverse backgrounds, again, first generation, part-time, non-traditional age students, low-income students, underrepresented racial ethnic minority students, just to name some subpopulations within community colleges. And when we look at the origin of the colleges, one thing that I am very proud of as a native Illinois resident, born and raised in Chicago, we pride ourselves here in Illinois with having been the home of the very first community college. William Rainey Harper actually was the one who decided, hey, why don't we have two different tiers of education? He, along with some others, again, the leadership of J. Stanley Brown and many other folks, contributed to the creation of what we now know to be Joliet Junior College in 1901, which again was birthed right here in the state of Illinois. And so the community college was really coming into its own at the beginning of the 20th century. And this was marked by a call for higher skilled citizenry to foster economic stability and growth. It was in response to a need for skilled labor. Now, again, while that was at the beginning of the 20th century, we're in the 21st century, and we see that kind of call to arms still with community colleges being a tier of higher education whereby individuals who may not have otherwise had a post-secondary opportunity can be further encouraged, have further education beyond secondary. And so by definition, community colleges are not generic. They derive their unique differences and relevance from the various communities that they serve. And today, the local connection is just as critical as when they evolved in the early years, when we think about the context of community colleges and how they meet the needs of their respective communities. Now, to tell you a little bit more about community colleges and who they serve, let me just share with you that there are various institutional types for community colleges. Again, privately controlled, publicly controlled institutions. The vast majority of community colleges are public institutions. We have 982. There's a total of a little over 1,100 community colleges in the U.S. And we have, when you consider other branch campuses, a larger variety of institutional types. There are minority serving institutions that are community colleges, MSIs with the 2-year focus as well. There are institutions that have large enrollments, as you well know. We also see a variety of students. The most pluralistic of collegians among today's post-secondary attendees are at community colleges. We have roughly 45%, so again, nearing 1 out of 2 undergraduates attend a community college. Many first-time freshmen, roughly 2 out of 5, attend a community college. The majority of students of color, when you look within and between groups, are represented at community colleges among their undergraduates. So again, roughly half of Black students enrolled in college, 57% of Latino students in college, upwards of 60% for Native American students, and about 2 out of 5 Asian Pacific Islander students that are undergrads are at community colleges. Again, a robust number of students at community colleges do work full-time, at least 1 in 5. We also have a good number of students, well over 60% that receive federal aid. That bumps up another 10% or so when you look across forms of aid. Now, having shared a little bit about the student demographics, the origins of community colleges, and the institutional types, I'd like to just share with you that when we think of community colleges as well, we have lots of different varieties relative to governance and structure. As you can see here with this slide, there's the top 10 largest number of public community colleges. And this is, again, systems, again, governed very differently, where some have a lot of autonomy and others are very centralized in terms of their governance structure, some even embedded within their 4-year institutions. The slide before you now just gives you a snapshot at looking at adults with associate's degrees. Community colleges are marked in terms of being noted for having the associate's degree, a 2-year degree, as its highest degree, but there has been quite a bit of trends in terms of community colleges also offering applied baccalaureate degrees. So the associate's degree isn't necessarily the highest terminal degree that is conferred at community colleges. When you look at the numbers here, this is broken out by racial ethnic groups in terms of the number of adults that do hold a 2-year degree. And you can see a pattern in looking at the numbers whereby 2/3 of those that do hold associate's degrees are white, and folks of color collectively are the other third. One of the reasons community colleges are a game changer is we have increasingly a concern around the ability of young folks to be ready to move to work as well as college. Are they ready for the world, ready to compete? And in many regards, we're finding that there's some ill preparedness relative to college and career readiness. The Obama administration's goal that by 2020, the U.S. will once again lead the world in the proportion of adults with a college degree has been in numerous reports. And though it's rife with recommendations on how to achieve that aim, the progress has been slow. The Lumina Foundation has a similar goal. Their big goal that 60% of adults nationwide will have a college credential by 2025. Well, in 2010, we only had 38.3% of adults between ages 25 to 64 that had a college degree. And so that is up by less than 0.5% since 2008. In our state of Illinois, one of the things that we are doing is trying to look at some innovative ways to get young people ready for careers in college. And we have what is called the STEM CCR project, as in STEM College and Career Readiness. One of the goals of STEM CCR is to provide a means of making sure that this problem of remediation is curbed prior to high school graduates moving on to their college coursework. Unfortunately, the path to college for many students upon high school graduation is one that's troubling, and that there are detours that are namely known as remediation. And so with this problem of remediation often is a misalignment between high school and college curricula. We want to make sure that we provide some interventions in STEM CCR, launched by the Illinois Community College Board and through monies from Race to the Top and supported by the Illinois State Board of Education, is a project that is doing just that. It provides an academic intervention in high school mathematics, and it is a preemptive effort to help students avoid, math remediation once they enter college. And we know with math, it is often a gatekeeper with regard to students being able to pursue STEM fields of study. So some key literature on STEM and community colleges. Just to note that, again, we know that women and racially ethnic diverse groups are the fastest growing populations within the U.S. We are not ranked very favorably in contrast to 24 countries where the percentage of the 24-year-olds who have earned a first degree in natural sciences or engineering is where we want it to be. And we also see that we are not doing as well with our students of color relative to having earned a degree in these areas as well. Again, we all know that STEM job growth is expected to be on the rise. It continues to rise, that there is a need to have more domestically trained STEM professionals and diversity of those STEM professionals. We also know that there are low numbers of employees in STEM among particular groups in comparison to the majority group. And while we see that by and large there is a disproportionate higher number of students of color within community colleges, we also note that their aspirations exceed their tier in many regards. And so what is also troublesome are the low transfer rates of students of color, as well as the recruitment and persistence prior to transfer within community colleges. So I want to share with you, again, some highlights from a study that I've been involved in. So with the problem, again, we've noted very well, and the literature confirms that, there's an issue with regard to the lack of STEM majors, diversity, pathways, and STEM workers. And what we're not as clear about is the extent to which community colleges can be looked at to enhance student success. Some would argue yes, others no. I'm in that camp that would say yes, community colleges are definitely partners and provide a conduit onto which students, diverse students, can pursue STEM fields, and they can have STEM careers as a result following transfer, as well as if they were to stop short of transfer, with some of the high skill, high demand, short-term certificates, long-term certificates, have some labor market returns for their efforts. So student attendance, we know, is also changing. Long gone are the days where students just enter and they stay with the same institution, as a first-time attendee of any institution without any lag time, without, taking any time off. As a full-time attendee, that's just not the model any longer. And so we see that we need to be more nimble relative to how we look at pathways for STEM and diverse student learners, as multiple institutional attendance is more commonplace these days. So as I mentioned, I want to share a few pieces of our highlights from a study on transfer students in STEM. We took a look at STEM majors, and in particular, we looked at attendance patterns. For example, the number of previous colleges, and we wanted to take a look at the swirling effect of the students and if that had any impact on their academic performance, as well as transfer shock. We understand, transfer shock to be where there can be a dip in student performance upon transfer to a second or third institution and not the native institution of attendance. We are also interested relative to swirling, the extent to which students are having concurrent enrollment as well as transferring multiple times. Among our research questions, we wanted to look at whether there was an association between gender and race ethnicity with STEM major and the transfer hours earned, the number of colleges they previously attended, as well as the transfer type. And I'll get into a little bit more detail regarding transfer type shortly. Is there any between and within group differences was a question that we had in terms of those credit hours earned, GPA, among transfer STEM majors when we look by race and ethnicity. Also, we wanted to understand a little more about mobility for students relative to whether or not they had gone to, again, multiple institutions, the type of transfer, as well as if that predicted transfer shock for these students. The study was guided, and we felt there was heuristic value relative to the following theoretical frameworks: again, social mobility, student swirl, and transfer shock. Just to share with you some background about the context of this. For this institution where the study was based, there were 2 out of every 5 undergraduates that were transfer students. So roughly about 42% of the undergraduates at this institution were transfer students. And that represented a significant portion of the student body. 10% of the total student body in terms of the STEM majors were present at this campus. But when you just isolate and look at STEM, 40% of the STEM majors were transfer students. And so that was proportionate with the larger transfer population in general. 65% of the STEM majors were white students, irrespective of male or female, but primarily what we found was that there were slightly more females. Students of color majoring in STEM disciplines consisted of 18% African American, 4% Asian, 3% Hispanic. And there was no other racial ethnic category that comprised more than 1%, and 6% of the STEM majors did not designate a racial identifier. This study was an ex post facto study, one that was exploratory in nature. We wanted to look at causes, what causes difference, and the conditions in terms of some students that swirled or did not swirl, as well as if some had experienced transfer shock or not. The data was accessed through institutional research, and the sample consisted of 1,064 transfer STEM students. And among the data analysis relative to methods, we conducted descriptive stats, ran those, correlational analysis, as well as analysis of variance and regression analysis. And with the descriptive findings, you can see there that, overall, there were, for transfer STEM, 42 female, 58% male, but roughly 2/3 of students among these STEM transfer majors were white, non-Hispanic, 12.6 African American, 3.6% Asian American, Pacific Islander, the same for Latinos respectively, and 9.5% unknown for just the transfer STEM demographic. And there was also an interesting finding in that nearly 2/3 of the transfer females of color were African American. %70 of the STEM transfer students majored in one of the following areas. Again, biology being the major of choice for many transfer STEM majors. When we looked at the data by gender and race ethnicity, 6 out of every 10 of the females that were STEM majors also desired biology as their STEM field of choice. So it was the most pursued STEM major among both male and female students and across students by race and ethnicity. So in terms of swirling, one of the things that we hadn't anticipated was that we found that there had been as many as 7 institutions that individuals had previously attended. Now, while that was more of an anomaly, an outlier, we did see that there had been multiple student attendance, and on average where students had attended 2 other institutions prior to transferring to their current institution. The 48 transfer patterns that we found in terms of looking at transfer type. Again, we talk about transfer, and we know that in terms of a lateral transfer, again, that would be from the same tier, and then vertical from one tier and then upwards. So the no degree, those were institutions where students were, say, at a institution that was post-secondary training was available, but they did not get a degree. They may have gotten an award. So they'd gone from transferring out with no degree and transferring into a 2-year program. We looked at that as one type of vertical transfer. Then others that still come out of that type of a scenario, but instead of transferring to a 2-year, transfer to a 4-year institution. Then there's the traditional vertical transfer, which we refer to as the 2 to 4-year transfer from a community college to a 4-year institution. And then a traditional lateral from one 4-year college to another 4-year college. And also we had traditional lateral with regard to transfer between community colleges. Then the vertical lateral, again, the extent to which students had made a transition, say they started at a community college, transferred to, started at a community college, transferred to a 4-year institution, and then transferred to another 4-year institution. And then with reverse transfer, and again, when I say reverse transfer, I'm not talking about reverse transfer of credit, right? That's very different. This is the more traditional definition of reverse transfer, whereby a student starts at, say, a 4-year institution and then transfers to a 2-year institution. We also had cases of multiple reverse transfer as well, multiple lateral swirl, multiple lateral and vertical swirl, where a person starts at a community college, they transfer to another community college, they transfer yet to another community college, and then transfer to a four-year institution, and then may have transferred back to a community college. Okay, so this is what we found that bubbled up around these various attendance patterns of students relative to swirling. So just to share with you, we did find some significant positive correlations between race and major. So we also found relationships between 2-year college credits earned with their transfer hours earned. There were higher amounts of 2-year credits and transfer hours earned that were positively associated with white transfer STEM majors, as well as with international students or race unknown transfer STEM students. We found a negative association between transfer type and race, with higher values on transfer type reflected in the multiple transfer and swirling. And so this relationship was associated with students of color primarily. And gender and major were also positively correlated. We found that gender, along with transfer type, illustrated a high degree of association between gender with vertical and multiple transfer. I'll go back just a second, and just to note that in between, we wanted to make sure that, what kind of accounts for these relationships. We added some post hoc multiple comparisons and found, again, some significant differences as well as relationships when we parceled out looking at students by race and ethnicity with their STEM major and their overall credit hours attempted and earned. Here you see our analysis of variance results, again looking at and parsing out those within and between group differences by race and ethnicity among our transfer STEM majors. And you can see where we have some significant differences relative to major with overall credit hours as well as credit hours earned, the transfer credit hours attempted, credit hours earned that were transfer credits, and those that are 2-year credit specific that were earned. When we looked at some more of the causal features of what's going on, we found that there had been this way in which the higher the number of credit hours attempted and transfer credit hours earned was predictive of students experiencing transfer shock. And again, with transfer shock, that really speaking to the extent to which upon moving from one's prior institution to the next institution, that students may experience a dip in performance or grades. It's not uncommon that they will also have a rebound effect, but we did find that when we looked at the more credit hours they attempted, but didn't necessarily earn, as well as with the fewer hours that were transferred among those credits earned, that again that was predictive of transfer shock among the STEM transfer students, but only for the STEM transfer students of color. And then overall credit hours earned did reflect better GPAs among students of color that were STEM majors that had transferred. There's some limitations, as there are with anything with this study. It's not a national probability sample because there was no random selection of the transfer students, but this data was drawn from an institution that posits itself on being transfer friendly and boasts having a transfer receptive culture, given that little over 8,000 of the student body among the students at the undergraduate level were transfer students. There, in terms of cause-effect relationships, again, we caution with that, and the findings do yield some statistically significant associations, and those that are emerging only suggest possible causation. Some of the conclusions we have drawn from this are that, again, when we look at the total landscape of community colleges, and the need for a diversified, skilled workforce, that there are lots of opportunities where community colleges will not just right now, but continue to be into the future in demand, as we have an increased need for a more skilled, high demand workforce. And that there is gainful employment opportunities and labor market returns for community college students that confer STEM degrees at community colleges, as well as use the community college as a springboard via the transfer function onto further education and to work. And despite the transfer function not being seamless with regard to articulation initiatives, the fact that students that transfer in STEM are leaving behind a lot of credits that do not transfer to the senior institutions, the four-year context, there's still currency to be garnered with the sector providing a catalyst for broadening participation. We do see that there should be more work around the exploration of student swirl and the extent to which our institutions, both 2- and 4-year alike, can be more nimble in accommodating the swirl in order to increase access and in order to aid with the completion agenda. Some implications for practice and additional research is we want to make sure that there is some continuity relative to how students matriculate from one tier to the next, to remove barriers to their progress and time to degree. We also want to look at ways in which at the four-year level, because there's a robust number of students, critical mass of pluralistic student learners at the community college, how four-year institutions can be intentional in partnering with community colleges to create additional pathways and attract diverse students and high-performing students in STEM fields. We also think that it's important that there's some additional study around issues of student satisfaction with regard to the transfer process from their outgoing institutions, as well as to how their receiving institutions facilitate that process. Here are some additional references that are cited. And we have a few minutes now. I believe there's maybe 10 minutes or so left where we can have some questions and comments. We just have a question that came in regarding whether or not there were differences in transfer shock for biology majors versus engineering-based majors. That's a great question. One of the things I probably should have shared up front, this institution that we conducted the study with, that again, the study was conducted there because they were ripe with a large number of transfer students and considered transfer friendly with a transfer receptive culture. While biology was the major of choice across student demographics among the STEM transfers, they did not have engineering. So engineering was not a major at this institution. We did see where there was transfer shock among biology majors, but not as prevalent when we did those analysis that looked at it just by major. And again, there wasn't or isn't engineering at this institution. All right. Are there best practices that you've identified related to the implications? Yes. And in terms of some best practices, one of the institutions that I think we can kind of point out in terms of an exemplar is Macomb Community College in Michigan. There's also a few other institutions where they are being very intentional relative to creating programs that reach to the high schools and engage students in terms of attracting them into STEM majors and fields of study prior to entering college. There are also some programs that are highlighted in recent Aspen report. And I think that I can post that. I believe I can get that link up for you. Okay. Additional question that is coming after that. Let me scroll down. What are campuses doing to make students feel not so isolated within the STEM field? Are there practical applications that can be applied across the board for all institutions? And yes, there are some practical things that can be done across institutions. For example, one of the things that we have found is that in terms of students of color in particular is having affinity groups and STEM clubs whereby students can begin to have conversations and discuss their STEM scholar identity, the extent to which they can feel as if they have some affirmation and have peers that look like them, and because they are so few and far between. And one of the things as well that we have found in terms of that could be applied more broadly is with regard to having students do things relative to social as well as academic engagement that will help them to not feel as isolated. And we're seeing some best practices around the country with regard to that. But again, we still don't have the transfer numbers that we'd like to see relative to, again, students not losing credit hours, having more articulation initiatives. I think, relative to retention, how do you develop more models around retention models that will help not have as many students in terms of losing them to attrition. The college student paths in and out of STEM fields statistical analysis report that NCS has out provides some avenues to think about in terms of how to get students interested in STEM, but not just interested in STEM. Once you attract them, to not push them away, particularly students of color, to think about how the traditional ways in which we've done programming for students, that those can be challenged to be more responsive. Let's see here. Link to the PDF of this presentation. Oh, I'm just reading what that is. Another, I guess I failed to mention while we have a couple minutes left, that there's another resource that's good in terms of if you're interested in STEM interventions, in terms of identifying best practices for STEM. There's the Quality Approaches in Higher Education that has a report by Dyer Barr. And again, I can get this link posted shortly. But you want to take a look at that because they talk about the drivers for success in STEM intervention programs. And again, thinking about it from a pipeline perspective of from high school moving into and through and out of community college onto the workplace and or further education at a 4-year. Yes, Elaine, I'm going to share the links. All right. Other comments? I'm emailing those.
Does anyone else have any questions out there before we wrap this up? Again, the link to her PDF is up in the little files 5 upload area. If you see that, where she was sharing her PowerPoint. See that or not?
Well, it looks as if we have no other questions or comments. We will be forwarding some additional links to today's attendees on best practices. And with, I guess, a minute to spare, I'd like to, again, thank you for your time and attention and for spending this time with us for this afternoon's webinar. Take good care.